This experience occurred when I was about 15 or 16. I was also with a friend of about the same age and his dad. We were in the woods behind our houses. We lived in the same neighborhood. We went back into these woods many times to hike around and play paintball. One day, we decided to go a little deeper into the woods just to check it out. And here's a little bit of background. This is an old forest/protected wetlands that are a few square miles and surrounded by roads on all four sides, located in the northeast US. For a while, we were wandering along. It was mid to late spring, so the forest was pretty lush and green, when one of us sees a small patch of white coming out through the woods. It stood out pretty easily in contrast to the green leaves, so we decided to investigate, and the three of us headed off in the direction towards this mysterious white spot coming through the leaves. If you've ever walked through dense woods, you'll know it's difficult to walk in a straight line because of fallen logs and brush. Anyway, we keep walking towards this object for what seems like a while. I've racked my brain, but really can't recall how long. But this white object still hasn't come into focus. It still looks like a white blot, and is just as far away as when we first spotted it. We didn't think much of that at this point, or at least I didn't, and continued walking in this thing's direction. It must have happened 2 or 3 times that we'd walk towards this thing for a few minutes, stop, and notice that we still weren't getting any closer. At this point, I think there was a little tension building, but nothing too out of the ordinary. At some point though, as we were getting closer, we noticed the object is starting to fill out. We can clearly see now it's a tiny white house on a hill. I'd say the structure was about the size of a shed you might keep your lawnmower in. We were excited because how often do you come across something like that? It's still a little ways away, but again, very obvious this little white house is what we had seen and been walking towards. So as we continue towards this little house, we lose it from sight momentarily as we go up and over another hill in front of it. But as soon as we get to the top of this hill, the small white house is gone. We're confused as hell looking at each other, but keep walking to the hill we had previously seen this house on. This last part happened pretty quickly. We get to the top of the hill, still looking at the other hills close by, to see if maybe we just got turned around or something and we'd see the little house, until one of us noticed an old foundation in the ground at the top of this hill, exactly where the house had been. The shape of the foundation was exactly the size of this mysterious vanishing white house. I barely had time to notice the foundation when all three of us heard a growling-like sound that got louder until it was as loud as a chainsaw. Nothing was said, but the three of us, including my friend's dad, sprinted out of the woods in the direction we came. I don't recall ever discussing what happened with the 2 others I was with that day. Since this happened, I tried looking on Google Maps for some kind of indication that the house was there, and we just lost it, but the forest top is too thick. About 1.5 years ago, I told my brother what had happened, and we went back into those woods looking for the house. About 1.5 years ago, I told my brother what had happened, and we went back into those woods looking for the house, but didn't find anything. Although our search wasn't very thorough because it was winter, so it was pretty cold, and with snow on the ground, it was hard to pick out what might be the White House from the surrounding snow.
For a little background, I was 15 years old when my parents divorced, and my mom and I moved into an apartment in town. The apartment was very old and located in a small town in Maine. It had an upstairs unit and a downstairs unit, which was ours. When we first moved in, it felt like I was never alone, even when my mom was away. The trouble started when something began to whistle to me in the shower. I think that's where it lived. The bathroom gave off an especially creepy vibe, even though it was newly renovated. Most of the showers I took while living there, the whistling occurred. Then it got more brave. It began mimicking my voice to my mother. She used to get up at around 5 a.m. for work, and she swears that one morning, while she was toweling off in the bathroom, she distinctly heard the door open and my voice say, "Hey, Mom." It startled her so much that she screamed a little, but when she looked up at where the voice had come from, there was no one there, and the door was still shut. After that, there was the midnight screaming. There were 3 bedrooms in the apartment, and from every single one of them, you would hear terrible screaming, like someone was being tortured, coming from the living room. It was a really quiet street, and we were absolutely sure it was coming from the inside of the house. The apartments were well insulated, and we could never hear the upstairs neighbors, so we knew it wasn't coming from their unit. My brother didn't believe us until he stayed with us in the third bedroom one night. He was 18 and living with my dad at the time, but he heard it too. I began to have extremely vivid nightmares. A reoccurring one was that my mom and I would be alone in the apartment, when suddenly the lights would turn off and the entity itself would chase us around, ensuring that we were unable to escape out the front door. It would eventually kill my mom and leave me alone in the dark with no way out. I woke up most nights in a cold sweat. At first, I thought it was just a ghost, but it definitely became more and more demonic in nature over time. On one occasion, I had a friend over in the middle of the day, and we were sitting in my room as I was telling her about all the creepy things going on in our house. I don't think it liked me telling her, because in the middle of my sentence, we suddenly heard 3 extremely hard and loud bangs on the wall that my room shared with the kitchen. It knocked so loud that the poster that was hanging in the spot partially fell off. We went into the kitchen to see who may have done that, but my mom wasn't home, so it wasn't her. We checked the spot that we heard it come from, and in that spot were kitchen cabinets full of glasses. No one could have knocked that hard in the spot without having to reach into the cabinet and avoid all the glasses that were in the way. Then it finally moved on to hurting me. I woke up one morning with 3 deep, long, burning red scratches on my thigh. They were side by side, like columns. I always wore long, thick flannel pajama pants to bed. Maine is very cold, it was necessary, and kept my fingernails very short, because I played baseball in high school. There was no way I did it to myself. I also had nothing sharp anywhere near the bed. That was when I started being not just afraid of it, but petrified by it. Finally, one afternoon, I was sitting on the end of my bed with my legs hanging off. I had a trundle bed that was so heavy, it took 3 men to move it into the room in the first place. I was watching TV when the entire end of the bed that I was sitting on lifted up, shook in the air for only a moment, and then slammed back down. I immediately thought I must have hallucinated that. And I know this is the part where some listeners will say, okay, she's so full of it and this is all fake. But I swear on everything that this all happened. I was so scared that I didn't move for a few minutes. I just let the tears run down my face as I sat there, trying to convince myself that I had finally lost my mind and imagined it. I ended up moving in with my dad after 2 years of living there. I couldn't take the terror anymore. After I moved out, nothing followed me, and I haven't experienced any activity like that since. My mom moved out about a year after I did, and she hasn't had any activity since moving either. I could really use some of your answers though. In your opinion, was this entity a ghost? Or was it a demon? What did it want? Why do you think it was attracted to the apartment, but not my mom and I? Was it trying to make us leave, and was pleased when it succeeded?
This occurred when I was about 11 or 12. I'm 28 now, and I was staying the night at my friend Danny's house, who lived just a few houses down from mine. There was a large pond behind our neighborhood, and we spent a lot of time there growing up. We'd go fishing, ride bikes, explore the small forest, etc. But we really enjoyed catching turtles and tree frogs. Might sound weird, but what can I say? We had somewhat of an obsession with reptiles and amphibians. Another thing I should note is that there was an old Native American trail that went through all the backyards of our street. It wasn't the Trail of Tears, but it was related to it in some way. I don't really remember. Back to the story. I was up late playing video games with Danny, and after a while we wanted to do something else. It was close to midnight, but we decided to go out and try catching some tree frogs. A family that lived in a nearby house had gone on vacation, and they had a perfect backyard for catching frogs. We hopped their fence and started exploring. Almost immediately, I started getting a weird feeling. I had the feeling we were being watched or something was nearby, and there was this odd energy in the air. I don't know how to explain it, but something just felt off. I remember feeling afraid, but I had no reason to be. We had done this kind of thing many times before, and it never inspired fear. About 10 minutes in, we thought we heard the frog saying, "Help me," in a croaky, froggy voice over and over again. The weird thing is, we couldn't see any tree frogs with our flashlights, and the yard wasn't that big. They started chanting in unison, and that made it much louder. Feeling more than a little creeped out, we bolted out of there and back to the street. Now we were standing under a streetlight on the street corner across from where the frog house was. I looked up at the light and noticed at least 15 dragonflies attached to each other like the human centipede. They were doing a spiraling motion as they flew closer and closer to the light. It was weird. So we heard or saw two unusual things, but you could possibly explain them away. What happened next, however, made absolutely zero sense. After the dragonflies did their thing and flew away, Danny and I remained standing under that streetlight. We began talking about the strangeness of the frogs in particular. We both heard them croaking the same phrase, and we were pretty much just saying, what the hell was that about? At some point during the conversation, I was instantly overcome with the most intense adrenaline rush I've had in my life. That feeling of fear without a source while at the frog house was back, but much, much stronger. It was like my fight or flight response was signaled for no reason. Once again, everything felt off, and it felt like there was an intense energy all around us making the air heavy. I was terrified, and I found out later my buddy was feeling the same thing. I became as still as possible, listening intently to my surroundings. I didn't hear anything unusual, but I suddenly began to feel drawn to look at the street behind me. I knew something was there. Whatever was behind me was the source of my fear, and it was putting out overwhelming energy with its presence alone. I hesitantly turned around and looked. In the middle of the street, about 20 yards away from us, there was an ordinary-looking 5 to 7-year-old girl with long, dark black hair wearing a white nightgown. She was sitting Indian-style on the street pavement with a doll in her lap, and she was combing the doll's hair with a hairbrush. I was pretty much terrified beyond imagination. I was frozen with fear and could barely think straight. There was an incredible amount of energy in the air, and I knew something wasn't natural. She looked innocent enough, but I felt like she could snap me in half with a snap of her fingers if she wanted to. Another creepy detail was that she never even looked at us. She kept her head down and focused on her doll, but she definitely knew we were there watching her. After what felt like an hour, realistically probably 15 to 30 seconds, a car turned onto the street and began heading down the hill towards the girl. I remember the headlights getting brighter and brighter as it approached her. You would think maybe I would try to save her real quick, but I legitimately couldn't move. Also, I didn't really expect her to get hit for some reason. I never felt like she was in any sort of danger. Eventually, she became lost in the car's headlights, never looking up from her doll this whole time, by the way, and the car just passed right through her without any sound of a collision. It stopped at the stop sign 15 feet from us and made a right turn. We took our eyes off of where the girl was as we watched the car turn. When we looked back to where the girl had been, she was gone. Instead, there was a dog on the sidewalk precisely parallel to where the girl was sitting in the street. The dog was looking right at me when I noticed it, almost like it was waiting for me to see it. Then, it just turned around a corner and trotted up the hill in the other direction. After a few seconds, the shock wore off and we sprinted back to Danny's house and spent half the night looking out his second-story window towards the street. I don't know what I saw, but Danny saw the exact same thing. I've always felt like there was a reason it happened, or a reason it showed itself, whatever it was, to us of all people. Last thing, the house in front of where the girl was seen was haunted. I lived on that street for 10 years, and 4 to 5 different families lived in the haunted house during those 10 years. All of them said it was haunted. I have a couple stories about that too, but this is already way longer than I wanted it to be. Please let me know if you have any theories on my experience.
I work in a pharmacy that's located inside a nursing home, and I've been working there for the past 4 years. Just a note to mention, I've had many prior paranormal experiences in my life, but this is still something that's ongoing. I've always felt a presence since the first week I started, but it was never anything that made me feel threatened. Things didn't really start happening until last year, when I started talking to my coworkers about feeling a presence and asking if it was something that they experienced as well. The day after I had a conversation with my coworker, I was working a night shift. On our night shifts, it's only one technician and a pharmacist. I was sitting in the back counter at my computer when I thought I'd seen someone come through the door. We're usually not busy at night, but there is the odd time when one of the nurses will come down for a bag of chips or a pop. I got up from where I was seated and walked over to our cash register, and from there, you can see the pop coolers and the chip racks. I didn't see anyone, so I left and walked back and forth between the aisles. Nobody was there. I then asked my coworker if he'd seen anyone come in, and he said no. But I was 99.9% sure someone had walked in through that door. I didn't think much of it. It was late, and I decided I was probably just overtired. I sat back down in my chair and started filling prescriptions. About 25 minutes later, I look up and see a pack of toilet paper slowly moving forward to the edge of the shelf before it dropped on the ground, startling me. There's absolutely no way it could have just been our air system or a draft that knocked it off. My coworker seen this and thought it was odd too. I then told him that it was a spirit that moved it, and he looked at me like I had 5 heads. So, to prove my point, I brought up the security camera footage. On the video, you can see 2 bright and fairly large orbs moving around as the toilet paper was being moved. I showed it to him, and there was no denying that it was a spirit trying to make itself known. That was my first significant paranormal experience at the pharmacy. We've had many things go missing, only to find them in the strangest of places. For example, my car keys went missing one day from my locker, only for me to find them in one of the prescription vials. My coworkers all swore up and down that nobody hid them there, and I most definitely didn't. Things are always falling off of the shelves, and sometimes they're heavy items, not just something light like the toilet paper incident. We've had a 5-kilogram jug of Epsom salts crash to the ground and break open, and nobody was remotely close to the aisle. Many of my coworkers and I see what looks like someone walking out of the corner of our eye, only to realize no customers are in the store. We also hear what sounds like the door to the front entrance open and close, and nobody be entering the store. This happens multiple times a day sometimes. The only times I've ever felt threatened or scared so far was when I was working one night shift and got locked in the bathroom. It very well could have been a hardware malfunction, but I don't believe it was. The handle locked on the inside, and I don't normally lock it anyways. I did my business, flushed the toilet, and washed my hands. I went to walk out the seemingly unlocked door, and it felt like it had been shut from the other side. I kind of figured it was my coworker just messing with me, so I started yelling his name, telling him that it wasn't funny and to let me out. The handle started moving as if somebody was on the other side wiggling it. I yelled again for my coworker, and he must have finally heard me because I could hear his footsteps in the distance. He then asked me what was wrong, and then pulled the door open with ease. He's now finally starting to believe that I wasn't crazy, and this place actually had some paranormal activity going on.
What I'm about to tell you is an experience that my friends and I have lived some weeks ago, during the explosion of the TikTok trend called Randonautica, and it is quite related to it. When we first heard of this trend, we saw it as a way to try something new, to explore the boring and strange neighborhood in which I live, with the hope to see an unforgettable and creepy happening. What we saw, I'm sure, could definitely be described that way. It was dark. It was around 11 p.m. We were spent after trying to find something cool with the Randonaut app. We had tried to manifest something scary, an abandoned building or an entity, but the randomly generated points would always lead us to the countryside, and even trying to reach them was impossible as they were on private properties. After some hours, we decided to surrender and just to walk around my house as we had never really explored those old streets, and we found a weird and chained gate that blocked the way to a huge, seemingly abandoned house. There was a couch in front of the front door on which a black cat was comfortably sitting, and there was a dim light that came from a window that made it look as if there was someone inside. Near the couch, there were some objects from the 50s like a basketball basket covered in rust. The atmosphere was spooky and there were bats flying around, but we decided to keep walking until we found something that looked like a dead-end street. A street lamp started working at once, making 3 gates visible. The first gate was right at the end of the small road, the second one was on the left, and the third one, the most important one, was on the right. I saw another black cat behind the first gate, but I turned around, and after a little bit I looked back at the gate. As soon as I did that, I literally jumped after seeing a black sheet on the ground which was basically being dragged, but it quickly disappeared. I asked my friends to leave as we had previously seen a weird shadow, who could have been someone, behind some bushes, and it was giving me anxiety, but we decided to stay and check behind the third gate. There was something strange. It was sitting against a wall as if it was at rest, and it seemed like it was holding a huge stick, even though no hands were visible. Now that I think about it, it may have looked like the Grim Reaper's sickle. A little further from it, there was an old chair and a drawing resembling a face appeared right on the wall. It was smiling and it had eyes, a nose, and a curved drawn line which represented a smiling mouth. There was some sort of noose close to it, on the same wall, and a house which was behind it had 5-pointed star on the balcony. After seeing this, I really felt as if we were in the wrong place. I started panicking and convinced everyone to leave, and we got back home safe, but still with many questions regarding what we saw. These questions had led us to go back to the creepy street some days later. We thought about going there in the daylight, but somehow we ended up there even later than 11 p.m., and we met a different scenery. A huge white van was resting in the exact same place where we had seen the hooded man, and the drawing on the wall wasn't there anymore. We still can't explain what we saw, and probably never will, but it's a mystery that will probably haunt us forever. This story takes place in 2017. It isn't a very eventful story as far as paranormal encounters go, but I personally find those to be the most believable. I actually created an account just to share this and have it all written down. My then best friend, I'll call her Lex, and I were having a sleepover at my dad's house. I was 16 at the time, her being 17. We often had sleepovers on Fridays where we would just eat junk food, watch as much Netflix as possible, and have deep conversations. This night was no different, and so unremarkable that I've forgotten everything we did. That is, of course, until we were trying to fall asleep in my bed. I remember being completely exhausted, slowly but surely drifting off despite sharing a bed with someone. I was just on the brink of sleep when Lex got my attention. First, she simply asked if I was awake. I grunted in response, signaling her to continue. It should be said that I was quite literally a minute or two away from unconsciousness, so I didn't pick up on her tone of voice or think much of what she said next. "I'm going to use the bathroom downstairs," she told me, getting off the bed. This wasn't normal, her announcing that she would be slipping away to use the restroom, but I was too out of it to be annoyed or curious. Not long after she left, probably no more than 10 seconds, it started happening. Again, I was on the precipice of sleep, so my mind wasn't racing with thoughts or in any state to freak myself out. Nevertheless, I became filled with a feeling of impending danger out of absolutely nowhere. I was becoming very lucid very quickly as dread and anxiety overwhelmed me. I had never felt this kind of acute fear before, nor seemingly out of nowhere. Now wide awake, I opened my eyes and stared at the wall less than a foot away from my face as I slept facing away from the bedroom door. My heart raced as I tried to understand the situation, but I didn't move. Something told me that moving would be a very bad idea. My room was pitch black as well, so that didn't help matters. All I could think about was how scared I was, and how I hoped Lex would return soon. I can guess that a few minutes pass like this when suddenly the bed dips on the side I'm not occupying, as if someone was getting on it. Problem was, not only did Lex struggle to get on my bed due to its height, but my bedroom door had never opened. At this point, I was petrified, and I only became more afraid as I felt something against the back of my body. It felt like a person just gently pressed against me. I thought to myself hysterically that there was no way this was actually happening. I held my breath to better isolate the feeling, horrified to feel the presence moving as if it was breathing too. The atmosphere was still suffocating in the room, filled with what only I can describe as evilness. The aura of whatever was touching me screamed danger, don't move, I'll hurt you. My mind and heart are racing as I try to think of a way out of this. The only balm I have to lessen my anxiety is the fact I know Lex will eventually return. But what happens then? She wouldn't see whatever it was pressed against me when she entered the bedroom, too occupied with making sure she wasn't disturbing my sleep. So I told myself that once I heard the door open, I would address her and ask her to turn on the lights. After what I would come to find out was about half an hour, Lex finally did return. The second I heard the door open and light flooded into the bedroom, I called her name. She hesitated, her soft voice saying, "Yes?" I requested bluntly, "Turn on the lights." She did as I asked, and I shot like a bullet from my previous position, whipping around to inspect the area I felt the presence. There was nothing. I wouldn't notice right away, but later I realized that the horrifying aura that was plaguing my bedroom had vanished once Lex arrived. It was gone just as suddenly as it appeared. Still, I was in a state of horror for the next few hours. We watched some cartoons together and decided to sleep with the lights on, but not before talking about what had just happened. Lex revealed to me that the reason she had gone downstairs wasn't to use the restroom, but to call her boyfriend for emotional support. She told me that she felt panicked, wanting to leave the room to escape the stifling feeling. Lex couldn't get a hold of him and spent the next 30 minutes or so trying to calm herself down. In the morning, Lex and I would confide in my dad, the only other person in the house. He was rightly disturbed and told us that he had a nightmare that night. I can't remember what his nightmare consisted of, only that it was a really bad one. My dad's a vet, so he's not easily spooked, but it left him uneasy. The fact that my dad had a nightmare at all made this whole experience more notable to me. To wrap things up, I want to say that I had improperly used a spirit board a few years before this with a few of my friends at my dad's house. We were children, so we didn't take it any more seriously than any other Halloween game. Nothing of this magnitude occurred before though, just this one night. Lex and I were able to acquire holy water from one of the teachers at our high school after she told him the story. We used it to cleanse my bedroom. Nothing strange has happened to me or my dad since.